I could have the members and witnesses take their spots, please. Okay, I want to welcome and thank our witnesses for being here today. And we're winding down our study here in the transportation of dangerous goods. And with us today, we have a number of witnesses, and we're going to get right to your presentations. If I could call on the Airline Pilots Association, Captain Dan Adamus, and Mr. Mark Rogers, First Officer. 10 minutes or less, please.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. My name is Dan Adamus. I'm the president of the Airline Pilots Association International's Canada Board, and I'm a pilot with Jazz Aviation. With me this morning is First Officer Mark Rogers. He is the director of the Dangerous Goods Program with ALPA and is chairman of the Dangerous Goods Committee for the International Federation of Airline Pilots Associations, IFALPA, and First Officer Rogers is a pilot with United Airlines. I'll share our views on safety management systems, and First Officer Rogers will address our concerns regarding the transportation of dangerous goods. The Airline Pilots Association International represents more than 51,000 professional pilots who fly for 32 airlines in Canada and the United States. ALPA is also the largest non-governmental aviation safety and security organization in the world. As well as being our members' certified bargaining agent, we are also their representative in all areas affecting their safety, professional well-being. ALPA therefore has a significant interest in all issues affecting aviation. ALPA supports the effective implementation of safety management systems in aviation. ALPA has embraced SMS as the next great leap forward in advancing aviation safety. We see it as a comprehensive corporate approach to safety that involves both management and employees. But here I must share a cautionary note. ALPA supports the effective implementation of an SMS. Now that SMS has been implemented for airline operations, our experience shows that a company may become technically compliant but not embrace the underlying concept, such an SMS is not an effective SMS. ALPA strongly supports SMS for many reasons. It clearly establishes accountability for safety at the highest levels within a company. It provides for the reporting of safety occurrences and information without fear of retribution, and it requires employee involvement and a formal risk assessment and decision-making process. Under SMS, a company is not able to ignore a safety issue by saying that it is regulatory compliant. If a safety hazard is known or has been identified, a company is required to do a risk assessment and make a conscious decision on what mitigations are required to deal with it. SMS clearly establishes responsibility for identifying safety risks where it belongs, with the aviation industry. The traditional method of safety oversight based on detailed technical inspections may appear to take on the role of operational safety assurance. That may allow the aviation industry to lapse into thinking and to believing that safety is solely the government's responsibility. We believe the following provisions are absolutely essential to the success of a company's SMS. To proactively address safety issues, data is required. Strategies to enhance safety need to be data-driven. In the absence of accidents, the right kind of data is required. Human and organizational factors create errors or hazards which remain largely undetected until the right set of circumstances results in a serious incident or even an accident. An organizational climate where people feel free from negative consequences when reporting errors, deficiencies, and hazards is essential to obtaining all the data that is available, and therefore a reporting program must provide confidentiality and immunity from discipline to be effective. Exceptions would be a willful or deliberate act, gross negligence, or a criminal act. It has been ALPA's experience that most companies initiating SMS have fully embraced the concepts, adopting a safety culture from top to bottom. Unfortunately, a few do not. We have heard expressions of concern regarding protections from punishment and for confidentiality in reporting. In some situations, personnel who bring forth safety concerns or self-report incidents have still been subject to disciplinary action. The effect is that employees cease to self-report, which stifles the flow of data, thus defeating the very premise of the safety management system. In these instances, the company has an SMS on paper, but has failed to change its culture. Even with an effective SMS, it is still the minister's responsibility to provide comprehensive and effective oversight and to take the appropriate measures when necessary. When it is apparent that a company does not fulfill its obligations under an SMS, we believe that traditional oversight should be utilized rather than the SMS audit system. ALPA understands that Transport Canada has delayed the implementation of SMS for 703 and 704 operators and is in agreement with the decision. It is relatively simple matter to legislate the requirement for an SMS, but you cannot legislate the cultural change required for an effective SMS. Therefore, taking the extra time for education, encouragement, and mentoring of these operators will be beneficial in the long term, as ALPA believes a voluntary, confidential, and non-punitive reporting program is an essential element of an effective SMS. I will now turn it over to Mark for the dangerous goods portion of our presentation. Mark.
Good morning. I will provide our perspective on the safe carriage of dangerous goods and how the implementation of an effective safety management system focused on the transportation of these goods can improve aviation safety. Specifically, I would like to focus this morning on the transportation of lithium batteries and what must be done to ensure that they are safely carried aboard aircraft. Lithium batteries are part of everyday life for millions of people throughout the world, powering applications as varied as laptop computers, cell phones, flashlights, and cameras. These batteries are available in two major chemistries, lithium-ion and lithium metal. Lithium-ion batteries are generally rechargeable and contain a flammable electrolyte, while lithium metal batteries are non-rechargeable and contain metallic lithium. While the vast majority of lithium batteries shipped as cargo or carried aboard aircraft by passengers and crew members arrive at their destinations safely, there have been numerous incidents involving overheating and fire aboard aircraft, including two fatal 747 cargo accidents with onboard fires that involved lithium batteries. Additionally, testing conducted by the FAA at the William J. Hughes Technical Center in Atlantic City has shown that fires involving lithium batteries represent a significant risk to aircraft. If a single battery in a shipment is defective, damaged, or improperly packaged, it can spontaneously catch fire. This fire will then spread to every battery in the shipment, resulting in what may well be an uncontrollable fire. Consignments of lithium batteries may also serve as fuel for an independent fire, greatly increasing the intensity and severity of that fire. Because the risk of a single lithium battery in transportation is low, both the ICAO technical instructions and the Canadian Dangerous Goods Regulations provide exceptions for the shipment of small quantities of consumer-sized lithium batteries. If a package contains fewer than 2 lithium-ion cells, or 8 batteries, it is exempted from the majority of dangerous goods provisions, including the requirement to place a dangerous goods label on the package, train the shipper, and notify the pilots that the shipment is aboard the aircraft. The threat to the aircraft, however, comes from the fact that the dangerous goods regulations stop at the package level. There is nothing to prevent a shipper from consolidating many packages containing 8 or fewer cells on a single pallet, and nothing that prevents the operator from loading the entire aircraft with lithium batteries. In fact, there were approximately 80,000 to 90,000 lithium batteries aboard the Cargo 747 that crashed in 2010 in Dubai, a situation that would still be allowed today. There has been recent progress, however. In April of this year, I represented IFALPA at an ICAO working group in Montreal tasked with considering the transportation of lithium metal batteries aboard passenger aircraft. Recognizing that halon is ineffective at suppressing a fire involving lithium metal batteries, the ICAO Dangerous Goods Panel recommended that these batteries be prohibited as cargo aboard passenger aircraft. If approved, this decision will take effect on January 1, 2015. This is a significant safety step, yet does nothing to address lithium metal batteries on cargo aircraft, lithium metal batteries in equipment, or lithium-ion batteries on any aircraft. ALPA therefore believes much more work needs to be done. From a system safety perspective, the transportation of thousands of lithium batteries at a single location represents an unacceptable risk to the aircraft and its occupants. An effective safety management system involving dangerous goods would recognize the risk of large quantities of lithium batteries aboard an aircraft, instead of focusing the regulations on the package level. Lithium batteries should be recognized as dangerous goods, packed in an appropriate manner, and loaded into a cargo compartment with fire suppression. Additionally, the quantity of batteries must be limited to that which will allow the suppression system to be effective. In conclusion, ALPA believes Transport Canada should now take steps beyond those required by ICAO to ensure the promulgation of measures which will protect the public, flight crew members, and other individuals traveling on cargo aircraft, and those involved in the air cargo transportation system from the hazards currently associated with the shipment of lithium batteries by air. This action is necessary for improving the overall safety of air cargo operations and the protection of lives and property whenever lithium batteries are moved through the air transportation system. On behalf of ALPA's members, we would like to thank the committee members for the opportunity to appear before you today.
Okay, thank you very much. And we'll now move to the Air Canada Pilots Association. We have Captain Craig Blanford and Captain Ed Benoza. 10 minutes or less, please.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and committee members. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak to you today regarding, we'll focus on SMS in the few short minutes we have. I started flying when I was 15 years old in Newfoundland as a young air cadet. At the age of 18, I joined the Royal Canadian Air Force, was formally educated at the Royal Military College in Kingston. Flew for almost 20 years in the Air Force, and since 1998, I've flown with Air Canada as an airline pilot and airline captain. If you do all that math, it's about 38 years of experience, and I have a few good years left in me yet. Captain Ed Benoza is with me, and Ed is the chair of our Flight Safety Division at the Air Canada Pilots Association. Ed is also formally educated and equally or superior experience to what I have. I'm also the president of the Air Canada Pilots Association, and we're the largest professional pilot group in Canada. We represent more than 3,100 professional pilots who fly more than 35 million passengers around Canada and the world annually, safely on Air Canada and Air Canada Rouge, our new leisure carrier. Our members work every day on the front lines of safety. This is what they do. This is their lives, their livelihoods. They eat and breathe safety every single day of the week. So from them and through us, we can give you real-life experience with SMS. So you asked us to review SMS and make some recommended improvements. So we'll relate our experience to you in the evaluation of SMS, which we support in commercial aviation, but with the benefit of the varied experience that we have from bush flying, military flying. We have pilots who've flown helicopters. We have a varied background and experience level. We'll make recommendations for changes and improvements, but of course with 10 minutes we'll keep them very brief and focus on a few key points. The first that we'd like to recommend is that any lessons and all lessons that you learn from SMS should be transferred and carried across all modes of transportation, so that what we learn from aviation must be shared with rail and marine. I think that's very, very important that we do that. As my friend and colleague Dan alluded to earlier, the very foundation of any SMS program has to be the creation of a solid safety culture. That is the very rock of an SMS program, is the creating that safety culture in your airline. And of course, the cornerstone of a safety culture is a voluntary, open, and non-punitive reporting system. We have to be able to report openly and freely safety issues. Users of a safety system must have trust in the system and confidence that they will not face retribution or punishment for reporting safety-related issues. Incidents of a deliberate nature, intentional actions, or professional negligence cannot hide behind safety. We would never, ever support or condone that, and there must be a mechanism to deal with those kinds of incidents, but that's beyond the scope of SMS and safety. Currently, there's nothing in the regulations or nothing in the system that protects the confidentiality of flight safety or air safety reports filed by pilots or other employees with their employer. ASRs can and have been accessed through the Occupational Health and Safety Act. And the first incidence of that occurring with our pilots went into a huge defensive posture, being very, very reluctant to continue reporting freely and openly because they felt that what they would report would be used in some other fashion. Loopholes need to be closed to prevent confidence in SMS from being eroded. Others want to use these reports for different purposes, non-safety related purposes, in the courts, for workmen's compensation, for lawsuits. And of course, we can't permit that to happen, or you're going to erode the very foundation of our culture. Loss of confidence will result in fewer reports and an inability to find and fix problems. Fulsome, open, and honest reporting is the best way to identify and then correct safety issues and problems. Another source of reliable safety data is a flight data monitoring and a flight data analysis system, sometimes also referred to as FOQA. SMS programs are supposed to include an FDM program as well. FDM systems monitor and record flight data for review to identify systemic risks. This allows safety programs to identify trends in flight, and address issues before they actually turn into an incident. And we can give you lots of examples of that, where the flight data monitoring systems monitor all the parameters of a flight. And for instance, you can monitor a routine flight into a specific runway into, say, Halifax, identify a potential issue, educate our members on the problem that they're dealing with, train in the simulator so that it prevents that from occurring again, all without ever having an incident using flight data analysis. But currently, under the law, under the regulations, there's no protection for that data either, just like ASRs. And there should be a program and there should be guidelines. It works at Air Canada. It works with the Air Canada Pilots Association because of our tremendous flight safety relationship that's been developed with our employer, and we're able to write our own regulations and our own protections for that kind of a system so that we're able to enhance our safety at Air Canada. Of course, another key component for SMS success is oversight, but not the way it was before, not a culture of enforcement. We need a system that corrects problems when they're identified. And of course, we know that the 2012 Auditor General's report found that Transport Canada was not sufficiently managing risks in civil aviation. And we'll give you a very quick example, that regulations to address pilot fatigue have been stalled at Transport Canada. We have a great relationship with the department, and they're working on this, but it's still stalled in the bureaucracy a little bit. It's been 18 months since a panel of experts have created a report, made recommendations, and my friend Dan co-chaired and co-authored that report, and we're still waiting for some regulations with respect to flight and duty times, because fatigue is an issue that we've identified. Meanwhile, the Americans and the European Union have advanced, created new regulations, and we're still lagging behind the rest of the world. Transport Canada's oversight of SMS does not always meet the ICAO standards. ICAO requires a state authority to set acceptable levels of safety. ICAO requires an operator to have specific safety performance indicators and target values. ICAO requires audits and inspections at least once every 12 months. Transport Canada, while still there and still providing some oversight, has managed to somehow replace or modify most of these things to some other standard that's acceptable to Transport Canada. Yet, at Air Canada, we have a very good SMS system. It works. It works because of the good relationship between the pilots and the management and our employees and management and the employer. I've heard SMS explained as managers manage safety and employees deliver safety. Well, I'd like to think that SMS is like a three-legged stool. You have the regulator, you have the operator, and you need stakeholders. In our case, pilots or the employees. Input from the frontline stakeholders, in our case, pilots, are essential to the success of a good SMS program. When you have the stakeholders and the operator working together to develop a good safety program, we can often set our own standards. We can often monitor our own guidelines such that the regulator doesn't always have to be there. But there must be a resolution mechanism when we disagree on the resolution of a safety issue. And again, that's where the regulator and oversight from Transport Canada is essential. But it must be more sophisticated than the traditional model of inspections and enforcement. That has not worked in the past, and it will not work again. So I have three main points to finish up and leave you with, if I may, Mr. Chairman. We do remain concerned that Transport Canada is not adequately verifying regulatory compliance with SMS, especially for carriers or operators without organized labor, organized pilots, or somehow able to provide feedback to the employer. We believe that lessons learned from SMS in aviation should be shared across all modes of transportation, and that those airlines and operators with a more sophisticated SMS program, their lessons learned should be de-identified and shared with those who are not as sophisticated so they can also learn as well. And finally, the most important is a very, very solid safety culture, and we believe that any loopholes must be closed to ensure confidentiality and integrity of data reported through SMS. It is essential, and reporting will stop without those protections, and our safety culture will be eroded. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. And we'll now move to Air Transport Association of Canada, Mr. John McKenna, Mr. Michael Skrobica. 10 minutes or less, please.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, members of the committee. My name is John McKenna. I'm President and Chief Executive Officer for the Air Transport Association of Canada. I'm accompanied today by Mike Skrobica, our Senior Vice President and CFO. The Air Transport Association of Canada has represented Canada's commercial air industry for 80 years. We have approximately 180 members engaged in commercial aviation, operating in every region of Canada and providing service to a large majority of the more than 600 airports in the country. Parmi nos membres figurent des...
Our members include large airlines, regional airlines, commuter operators, air taxis, aviation educational organizations, and flight schools. Our membership also includes the air industry's support sector involved in all aspects of the aviation support industry. We refer to them as industry partners. We really appreciate the opportunity to appear before you today to address the important aspects of our industry that you have undertaken to study. The transportation of dangerous goods is an area where the airline industry has been most progressive for a very long time due to the obvious potential adverse impact on airline operations.
Management systems, however, I'll gladly answer questions on either dangerous goods or SMS. The implementation of SMS was to be facilitated by amendments to the Aeronautics Act. Bills C6 and C7 were tabled respectively in 2006 and 7. Key proposed amendments to the Aeronautics Act included the following: provisions to ensure employees of Canadian air carriers to report safety concerns voluntarily without fear of legal or disciplinary actions, what has been referred to as the non-punitive clause. Provisions to allow for more self-regulation in low-risk areas of the Aeronautics Act, thus allowing the better use of Transport Canada resources for those areas of higher risk, and additional tools for the Minister of Transport to ensure compliance and increased penalties for contraventions. La Chambre des communes a ajourné ses travaux.
The House of Commons was adjourned or prorogued before either of these two bills could be tabled for final reading. These amendments were on the table when the larger air carriers were involved in the collaborative development of safety management systems and were supposed to help its implementation both at Transport Canada and with operators.
Both a safety and a financial return. It is, however, a considerable investment, regardless of the size of the carrier's operations. Larger carriers, designated as 705 operators in the Canadian Air regulations, tell us today that they wouldn't do without SMS, but all agree that they had underestimated the task at hand when they started its implementation. In its 2012 watch list, the Transportation Safety Board showed that from 2001 to 2010, the 703 category, that's the air taxi operators, had incurred many more accidents and many more fatalities than the commuter operators, the 704, and the airline operators combined. During that decade, TSB numbers show that in the 703 category, 359 accidents resulted in 132 fatalities, whereas the commuter ops and the airline operators had reported 44 accidents and 0 fatalities. Canadian regulations mandating SMS have been in place since 2006, but so far only the 705 operators, the airlines, and the approved maintenance organizations that support them are obliged to implement a fully compliant SMS. ATAC wants to encourage and facilitate implementation of SMS for all commercial operators. We are very conscious of the fact that the SMS model that Transport Canada has approved for the 705 level is not reasonable for implementation by the smaller operators. In addition, the air transport industry has been getting mixed messages from within Transport Canada as to the future of full implementation of SMS throughout our industry. Par conséquent,
Consequently, we have developed the ATAC SMS Toolkit and Guide. This innovative tool designed to help small and medium-sized operators develop, implement, and maintain a compliant SMS was distributed free of charge to all of our members. We spent over 1 year on the investigation into determining the type of SMS appropriate and subsequently developing the necessary tools and services required to help the small and medium-sized operators. Our challenge was twofold. The first was to design an SMS model that would meet Transport Canada's requirements. The second was to come up with a model which would be accepted by the intended users, that is commensurate with the size and complexity of their operations, and that provides an operational and efficiency improvement.
A strategic document. It is the implementation of an even greater safety culture. The plan and its supporting processes are the way an organization sets itself up and runs its day-to-day operations. Large organizations accumulate and report colossal volumes of complex data. Organizational size and complexity and cultural change challenges would make it difficult for these organizations to implement reactive and proactive SMS processes simultaneously. Smaller organizations need to efficiently identify and meet the needs of the regulatory requirements, clearly identifying what is safety-critical information as different to nice-to-know information. This ultimately reduces the complexity of many of the processes, procedures, and subsystems of an SMS. Also, not separating business goals from safety goals simplifies and supports the cultural change necessary for the good implementation of an SMS. The risk management system is the procedural meat of SMS. The organization's safety oversight system is their risk management system, which is made up of 4 distinct processes. First, reporting. 2, investigation and analysis. 3, corrective action development and implementation. And 4, the measurement of effectiveness. Further, one must avoid confusing Transport Canada's responsibility of oversight, of safety oversight, with an organization's obligation to meet the safety oversight SMS requirements. While impossible in any organization, freedom from error is even more difficult to achieve in smaller organizations, which, in Canada, generally employ a wide spectrum of experienced personnel, from neophytes to experts, operates the least sophisticated and often older equipment, and operate in the least technically sophisticated and therefore potentially higher risk environment. Given this reality and TC's regulatory requirement to create an SMS commensurate with the size and complexity of an organization, the goal is to provide verifiable assurance that operations are safe. I will conclude by repeating that ATAC firmly believes that safety management systems offer both a safety and a financial benefit, but that SMS must be a major element of the air carrier's corporate culture for SMS to be fully functional and yield many benefits it offers. Also key is that the message from Transport Canada as to the implementation of SMS in all segments of the air transport industry must be clear. We at ATAC want to help operators welcome this vital element into their corporate culture and day-to-day operations. Thank you. Je vous remercie.
Okay, thank you very much, and we'll
Thank you.
questioning and go to Mr. Mai for 7 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to thank all the witnesses for being here today. Chair, first, there's an important issue that I'd like to address, and I'd like to put forward an oral notice of a motion. So I'll read the motion as follows: that pursuant to Standing Order 108, Section 2, in view of the fact that previous members of the Standing Committee of Transportation, Infrastructure and Community have asked to review any proposed regulatory changes because the 2003 risk assessment has not been updated, and since critical documents including the 2001 WOKES report have not been made public, the committee undertake a study on proposed flight attendant requirements by Transport Canada, which would allow Canadian Airlines to reduce the number of flight attendants on flights, including the impacts of any regulatory change on the safety of passengers, particularly with regard to the flip-flop rule, which is an internationally unprecedented option that every effort be made to ensure that the meetings be televised and that the committee report its result to the House of Commons. Merci beaucoup, messieurs, d'être ici aujourd'hui.
Thank you very much, gentlemen, for being here today. I would like to discuss somewhat this issue. Had we had these ratio changes for flight attendants, it would have had a direct impact on the SMS. Do you have a position in this regard? In other words, the change in the ratio, as you know, there are proposals according to which it would move from 1 for 40 passengers to 1 for 50. Do you have any views on this?
Flight attendant ratio is that we defer to the aircraft manufacturers and the safety standards that have been set in the manufacture and the certification of aircraft. And there's a process that the aircraft manufacturers follow to ensure that the proper number of assistants of flight attendants or other folks on board for the evacuation of aircraft and with specific guidelines and standards that are set by the regulators, whether it's Transport Canada, FAA, or around the world. And the other thing that we do know is that the ICAO standard around the world and most people around the airlines around the world have a 1 and 50 rule. So for us, that's the only position that we have or that we take with respect to that.
Je vais revenir justement ce que vous avez mentionné.
You mentioned several things today. I think everyone here today talked about the fact that there is a concern with regard to the reports that would be made by employees. In other words, punitive measures that could be taken, the employer being able to take measures if an employee, a pilot, or another staff member brings up safety issues. Do you have solutions, concrete solutions to put forward? What I'm seeing is that this problem still exists in the field. All employees are not safe. They're still worried. They fear that if they bring up a security issue, they will face repercussions in the workplace. What would your suggestions be with regard to a concrete mechanism? And why has the government not yet reacted to this? You've been asking for this for quite some time, but there's no system in place to protect employees.
Responding in English, but I'm born and raised in Newfoundland, and you'll forgive me. There are two issues. It's the reports, the actual reports, and the culture of flight safety reports and incident reporting, that they must be used and used for safety only. As I emphasize, it is a very, very rock and culture of, when I was a baby Air Force pilot, the very first thing I learned is that if I see a problem, I report it fully. And as long as I'm not doing anything wrong, intentionally, deliberate, or professionally negligent, it will be used for safety and not for anything else. So we need to make sure that there's regulations. You folks would know better than I do where those regulations need to be to prevent the misuse of those reports. We're not saying they need to be hidden. We're not saying that people can't see them. But we would argue that only people who are trained and understand what they're looking at should be allowed to see those reports that have been written with complete and utter honesty to help protect safety. The second part of that is the flight data management. Right now, the amount of data that we can collect from an airplane is incredible. And I'll ask Ed to tell you about that in 1 second. But we can create and produce a lot of data about flights, in flight, as they're landing, all around. There's nothing, there are no regulations, and there are no protections for that data. So when I'm flying an airplane, if you want to collect data about how I have performed my duties on an airplane, especially in the event of an incident, that is not protected at all. The only protections that we have is that we have an agreement in our contract with our employer to use it for safety only. Okay. And I might add, if I can...
Yeah, maybe
okay.
I'll have Alpa just answer the question.
Thank you. We represent pilots from 9 airlines in Canada, and there have been a number of instances where pilots have been disciplined after they've self-reported. And to us, it's a cultural issue within the particular airline. We've worked with these airlines, and for the most part, it happens a couple of times. It doesn't happen after that. When in extreme cases, we've had meetings with Transport Canada. We're not afraid to go to Transport, and Transport will pay particular attention to those particular operators and do an audit on their SMS and ask some questions if the procedures were followed properly. And so that in itself has led to help changing the culture at some of these airlines, because as Craig has said, if you can't report with confidence, knowing that you're not going to be disciplined, the information flow stops.
Yeah. Mr. McKenna?
Nous avions tout à fait appuyé les...
We fully supported the amendments proposed under C6 and C7, including protection of the information, of the data, and protecting as well the fact that it was regulated by the law and not the goodwill of the company. Both bills died on the order paper, so with the minority government situation, nothing came of it. But we fully support the protection of that information. The information provided by employees is involved, but it's also the case for the information of companies that are accessible to competitors for reasons other than safety, and we believe that this should also be protected, this information.
McGinty for 7 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning, gentlemen. Good morning this morning. Mr. Blanford, in your testimony, you said, quote, that a voluntary, open, and non-punitive reporting system, close quote, was instrumental, was foundational to a successful SMS. Is that right?
Absolutely, sir.
Okay. So can you tell us what happened with your predecessor, Captain Paul Strahan?
That's an open-ended question. I have no... What do you mean? Did something happen to him?
Well, I got something right here, but he was disciplined by Air Canada, threatened to be fired because of remarks on safety on CBC television.
We're mistaking it for two different things. If you submit an air safety report at Air Canada, you will not be disciplined. I've been the chair and the vice chair for the last 6 years. I'm usually the guy who calls you first when something happens in the middle of the night. I come into you, I go with you into the interviews, but Air Canada, they have a very, very robust reporting system. If I write an air safety report, if I self-report, I will not be disciplined.
Okay, so but if you go on television and tell the Canadian public, as the president of the union chief, that you make a comment about an international company which is in receivership, which is responsible for servicing Air Canada aircraft, you can be subject to threats from the CEO of Air Canada?
I wasn't privy to what happened in that incident, so I can't...
Is anybody able to tell us what happened? It's widely reported in the Globe and Mail and in the Financial Times.
I'm not aware of the intimate details of the discussions between the CEO and Captain Strachan at the time. I do know it was related to an employee-employer relationship with respect to things you say about your employer, and that could damage the employer, but otherwise, I don't know the details of that, sir. I apologize.
Do you know what the outcome of this dispute was between these two parties?
I can't comment on that either, no.
You don't know?
No.
You don't know, okay. So clearly there are limitations to a, quote, voluntary, open, and non-punitive reporting system, close quote.
I think it's important that our chair of our Flight Safety Division, sir, expressed that what we're talking about when we talk about an open and not...
I understand what you mean internally, but I just want to get on the record that there are limitations, right? There are limitations for a union chief who speaks openly about his concerns about safety at Air Canada. I want to move on if I can. You rightly point out, Mr. Blanford, in your deck that the Auditor General report from 2012 found that Transport Canada was not sufficiently managing risks in civil aviation. You then go on to tell the Canadian public today that Transport Canada, after 18 months, still have no standards on pilot fatigue. You say the United States and the European Union have already done so. Then you go on to say that Transport Canada, its oversight of SMS, does not meet international standards. Does not meet international standards. That the international standards require that the Government of Canada set acceptable levels of safety, that Transport Canada, under the Conservatives, allows air operators to determine their own acceptable levels of safety. Then you say that internationally, operators have to have specific safety performance indicators, target values. Transport Canada, under the Conservatives, does not have that either. Then you say internationally they're supposed to have audits and inspections at least once in every 12 months. Transport Canada, under the Conservatives, assess once every 36 months. We have a pretty big problem here with one of the legs, the three legs on the stool of SMS, don't we here?
Well, I would argue that the sky's not falling in, SMS is not broken, and I don't think there's a big flaw in the system. I think what this committee is doing is taking a pause and taking a look as the house is being constructed. Before we put the drywall on, we're looking to see, should we modify a room or two? And I think that's a very, very smart thing to do. So there are some issues, and we get our standards from ICAO. So when we defer back to anything, we always say, what's the international standard that we're trying to shoot for? And all I'm pointing out is that, yes, we don't always meet the ICAO international standards and goals and objectives.
And that's okay?
Not always, sir, no. From time to time, I think Canadians should be leaders, and we should make our own standards and set our own goals and objectives. And we don't always have to follow things that are set by other folks. But in the international world, there are some standards that we try and achieve.
Good.
And I just wanted to point out that those are some of the things that we should be shooting for.
So let me ask you this. How many direct and unannounced inspections by qualified Transport Canada inspectors have been conducted in the past, say, 5 years?
We don't have access to that information.
You don't know that?
Side, no. I know they've done there's been 2 SMS audits, we'll call them, in the last 2, one in 2009, and I believe they completed one last year.
So you don't know anything about direct and unannounced inspections?
No, we don't have access to that.
Does anybody at this table know about direct and unannounced inspections? The representative of the airline companies, the representative of the pilots, and another group of representative pilots. You don't know anything about direct and unannounced?
Specifically, no, but we know that these things are carried out.
You do?
No, of course they're carried out.
How many are there? Because we had union testimony here last week telling us there has not been a single direct and unannounced inspection in the last 5 years.
Well, I would contest that. What I'm saying is that although there are regulated, inspections, scheduled inspections, varying from 1 to 3 years, depending on the risk assessment of each company, unannounced inspections occur whenever Transport Canada decides it is worthy.
Mr. Buchanan, can you undertake for this committee to go to your members and get the data and table it here within, say, 2 weeks of how many direct and unannounced inspections have occurred with all your member companies? Can you commit to the committee to do so?
I will commit to ask them. I don't think I will report back to you within 2 weeks, considering we have about 180 members.
How about a month?
Yeah, that would be closer to what I could probably achieve.
So we can expect then from your members to get the facts, because we're being told something by the frontline inspectors, including Captain Slunder, who tells us that the numbers are jived, that there are sleight of hand at play, the numbers are not accurate, the number the minister is using is false. So can you help us with facts? Because you're on the front line of companies who actually comply. Can you tell us how many direct and unannounced inspections there have been?
I will inquire amongst my members to ask me to give me that information. Absolutely, as far as scheduled inspections and unscheduled inspections.
Great.
I'll give you that raw data with pleasure.
Very appreciated. Thank you, sir.
7 minutes.
Thank you to our witnesses for appearing. Just off the top, either Mr. Blandford, Mr. Adamus, whoever would like to tackle this, what is the difference for the public who are listening in, because we get into a lot of specific terminology, but what is the difference between a compliance inspection, an SMS audit, and a process validation inspection? Can you briefly outline the differences between those?
I'm certainly not an expert in those areas, but we always refer to the traditional audit as kicking the tires. I've been in this business for over 30 years, and in the early days, you would see inspectors walking around the aircraft, taking a look at it.
You're calling that an audit versus an inspection?
That was, we knew at the time as a traditional inspection.
Because definitions matter. We've heard from witnesses last week, the first testimony we've heard, that no inspections are done whatsoever. So we have to be careful about what are the differences between a compliance inspection, a safety management system audit, and a process validation inspection, because Transport Canada has responded to an order paper question in the past on those specific definitions and provided numbers. So for the comfort of Canadians who are watching, they need to know what are the differences and who's doing what.
Well, again, for the terminology, I'm probably not the person to ask.
Okay.
That's not something that we normally discuss with our company. We know inspections are going on. That said, for example, I'm doing recurrent training in the simulator next week, and there could be a Transport Canada inspector sitting beside the instructor to ensure that everything is as it should be. And that I've gone through that many times in my career.
May I comment?
Sure, go ahead, Mr.
I know there's lots of labels and names, and some folks say we should have these inspections, some folks say we should have audits. I mean, the ultimate goal is to make sure that we're safe and set up a system that ensures that we're safe. And that's why I emphasize to you that the three legs of that stool, the third leg is not formal, and that's the stakeholders and in our case, the pilots. I will argue any day of the week that we have in our group as much or more experience than any of the pilots at Transport Canada do, and we have similar training and similar backgrounds. That doesn't mean we're any better or any worse. My point is, if we're part of that three-legged stool, we can ensure that the appropriate standards, the appropriate safeguards are in place such that we're operating safely, and we do, and we are safe.
This isn't a theoretical discussion, however. If you look at, I'm thinking of the report called Stronger Ties. It was a report done in the rail safety side by an independent advisory panel. They talked about a 5-point grading system for safety management systems from immature to fully mature. According to that ranking, a 5, which is fully mature, would be that SMS audits replace traditional inspection. In other words, compliance inspection would be done on an as-needed basis if anything's identified as a risk in a safety management system. So the question really relates to, is that what we desire? Is there a proper mix? Short of that, that's much more desirable. If SMS is to be an added layer, it probably shouldn't be replacing traditional inspection. But what is the balance between the activities of not only airline companies but Transport Canada in forming that mix? How many audits are appropriate? How many compliance inspections? Transport Canada will say, it tabled in the House that in 2010-11 it had done some 13,000 traditional inspections. We have a union that says they've done 0 since 2004. So we have to get to the nub of this question. It's very important.
How the system works is your SMS program is approved by Transport Canada. I come to you, this is my plan, this is how I'm going to deal with the paperwork, basically. Every 18 months to 36 months, they'll come back and they'll do a PVI, Performance Validation Inspection. And what they'll do is they'll take a component, let's say the flight safety component of it, and they'll look at it, and they'll do the PVI on that portion of it. They'll come back. Now, they used to give you a grading score from your 0 to 5. I think they've removed that now. And they just assess the program, and they give you a report. If they see you're weak in some area, you've got anywhere between 1 day to 30 days to create a corrective action plan. And that's how it works at Air Canada.
So nobody's kicking the tires anymore?
It's every day the tires are being kicked.
Transport Canada?
No.
Anybody at Transport Canada kicking the tires anymore?
What do you mean by kicking the tires?
Well, Mr. Adamus used the expression that that they would, in terms of traditional inspection, somebody would be kicking the tires.
I think we have to ask ourselves, was that method of doing business more effective than the way it is now?
That's a separate question. I'm just trying to verify whether, in fact, Transport Canada, if anybody's inspecting any particular, is anybody looking at wheel bearings or the safety of emergency doors or any of those types of aspects of or flight instrumentation? Is anybody verifying that at Transport Canada?
I've seen a Transport Canada inspector in my jump seat doing a check on me. Just showed up impromptu.
Okay. So. That's in direct contradiction to what the UCTE said.
That was a year and a half ago. So
you said the National Audit Program was replaced by Transport Canada. When was that done? Do you know?
The National
you said, yeah, your deck says Transport Canada replaced the National Audit Program with SMS assessments every 36 months. When did that happen?
I'm not sure when they did it.
That's slide number, I don't know which one, 8, 9? Might be 9. 8.
Yeah, I'm not sure of the exact date. that it was done?
A year ago, 2 years ago, 5 years ago, 10
I'm
years
not sure
ago?
I could find out if it's important, sir.
Okay. It is important. We have a union who says nothing, no inspection has been done since 2004. So it's critical that we get to the veracity of that particular number, whether it's an outlier in terms of information, maybe even an outright lie for all that matter, or whether in fact that's true. Can you explain the difference on NPR? By the way, with respect to non-punitive reporting, I think we should be accurate about what happened with the Aeronautics Act amendments. There was a hoist motion in the House in a minority parliament, which, according to the House of Commons procedures, is tantamount to the defeat of a bill, in that it hoists it from the order paper and doesn't allow it to be discussed for an indefinite period of time. So the bill was, without voting it down, was effectively defeated by the opposition. But for the purposes of understanding what NPR is, what are the differences between CARES, CADORs, and non-punitive reporting for the benefit of people who are looking in? Why is NPR different? How is it different than the other two?
Okay, your time's expired, but allow the answer.
CADORs is the Canadian Aviation Daily Occurrence Reporting System. So let's say I take off out of Calgary and I misfly the standard instrument departure. The tower controller will submit a report, and it's called a CADORs. The other one is a CARES report. A CARES report is that in the SMS system, if I have a safety concern and I go to my employer and I submit a report and I'm not happy with the outcome of that report, I can submit a CARES report. And I believe that goes to the TSB that handles that report, and it follows through with that. So that's the difference between CARES and CADORs.
Okay, thank you very much. We now move to Mr. Komarnicki for 7 minutes.
Thank you. I'm just curious about what your understanding of a traditional inspection is, and as we've heard before, that there weren't traditional inspections being held, and yet I heard Mr. McKenna say that you had an inspector unannounced. And so what's your understanding of a traditional inspection, and have you experienced unannounced traditional inspections as you define it? Mr. Blanford, Mr. McKenna perhaps, or Mr. Rosa, go ahead.
You go ahead.
I think we're confusing, not confusing things, but is this a inspection of the carrier, or is this an inspection on a particular flight that day? What are we looking at?
Well, Mr. You tell us the difference between the two, and what your understanding of a traditional inspection would involve.
From a pilot's perspective, I can tell you that 20 years ago, a Transport Canada inspector would show up on my flight from wherever I was going, and he'd sit in that jump seat and he'd conduct a inspection on me and my first officer. I can tell you I've had, in the last 5 years, maybe 2 cases where they've shown up unannounced, or I don't say unannounced. I know, the day prior that he's coming there, and he'll be in the jump seat and he'll conduct an inspection on me. Now, that's the day-to-day operation, the guy on the line. How they conduct inspections with the company, the carrier, they could probably give you an answer better to that, but I know they do a PVI, and I know they've done a PVI, I believe, in 2009, and I know they just finished one up last year.
Mr. McKenna, you said the inspection that you had was unannounced, impromptu? No, one day in advance?
I didn't say that I had one. I'm saying that these things exist. The important inspection is the PVI. That requires a lot of time, a lot of preparation, and usually a team of inspectors come into your firm and can camp there for 2 to 3 days while they conduct all this stuff.
Do you know instances where they've come unannounced?
Not a team, but you've had inspectors drop in on following up on things, and yes.
Now, I heard Mr. Blanford say that, of course, effective implementation is probably the key in SMSs, and then an SMS on paper doesn't necessarily result in a culture of safety, and so I appreciate that. But one of the statements you made also is that ICAO requires state authority to set acceptable levels of safety, and I guess the implication is maybe that Transport Canada doesn't do that. But as I understand it, don't the Canadian aviation regulations themselves define the acceptable level of safety, so that there is state intervention in terms of setting sort of a baseline of safety?
If I could let's start with ICAO. ICAO has standards and recommended practices. It's up to a state to either adhere or not adhere. If they do not adhere, they file a difference. So you're letting the rest of the world know we're not in compliance with this particular area. One area where ICAO says the maximum age an airline pilot should fly to is age 65, Canada files a difference because you cannot discriminate based on age in Canada. So that's an example where Canada would not comply. Okay?
But by and large, the Canadian aviation regulations set out safety standards everyone must comply with?
Absolutely. So they would take the standards and recommended practice and make regulations to ensure that they adhere to the ICAO standards. Canada is actually a leader in the world for this, and as an exceptional safety record, and was one of the leaders out of the gate with SMS, Safety Management Systems. So if we look at, I want to talk a little bit, if I could, just on the inspection side. When I say traditional, you looked around, if there was something leaking from the engine, why is that leaking? You know, they would write up a report, you'd probably get fined or have a few days to fix it. Now with SMS, there's a culture that's been put in place so that it allows the workers and the operators to identify risks and problems, assess it, look for outcomes on how to best fix it. So because that's in place, Transport Canada believes, well, I probably don't have to go around walk that aircraft as much as I did in the past. They still have to do it occasionally to keep the system honest, just like CRA, we file income tax. Every once in a while, CRA will audit us.
A system, safety management system that actually is properly implemented and works.
It does. We have great.
Not only identifies a safety hazard, but conducts a risk assessment and actually does something to mitigate the risk that's identified. That's what safety management systems are meant to do.
Yes, and look at it as being proactive. Why wait till an accident happens to correct an action? Let's be proactive so we prevent that accident.
And of course, when I look at the Canadian aviation regulations, Section 107.3b states that a safety management system shall include a process for setting goals for the improvement of aviation safety and for measuring the attainment of these goals. So not only do you do the fact that you assess if there's a risk and then mitigate it, but it's an ongoing process for setting goals for improvement what already exists and for measuring the attainment of these goals. And so a properly implemented safety management system would have a process and would have goals and would measure whether they're achieved or not. And so wouldn't that, in essence, almost be superior to simply having an inspection to see if a regulation is met?
Absolutely, absolutely.
I would agree.
And so, again, it's a question of properly implementing that. And I noticed that you say in your deck here that Transport Canada does not require identification of any specific safety performance targets, but yet, by virtue of cars, they say that you must identify risks and then you must set targets and you must try to achieve those. Is that contrary to what I've just said?
Yeah, I'm sort of, and this is my fault, and I apologize that you took so much focus on those particular points. I guess I'm just trying to point out that some of the ICAO standards that we're trying to meet have not necessarily been met by Transport Canada, even though I'm not suggesting our system is broken, sir. I'm saying that Transport Canada doesn't say what the goals are. They say air operators set some goals. And I'm telling you that it works if you have the third leg of that stool. And the third leg of that stool are the employees or the pilots saying, yes, we think these are reasonable goals and we can evaluate and we'll operate safely and we'll fix the problems that exist. We don't need to have constant inspections for that to occur.
Okay, thank you very much. Your time's expired, Mr. Kormanicki. I'll move to Ms. Moran, 5 minutes.
Merci beaucoup. Merci à tous les témoins pour vos...
Thank you very much. Thank you to all the witnesses for your statements. I would like to come back to two aspects. You talked about lithium batteries that were an issue. You state that if there are lithium batteries, the pilot might act differently if he's aware of the situation. Mr. Blanford or Mr. McKenna might be able to tell us what might happen. Why would you act differently, and what would you do if you're aware of the fact that there are lithium batteries on board your plane? How would your behavior change?
We just make sure we have, again, documentation that tells us how these things should be packaged, how they should be protected, how many, what.
Mais qu'est-ce que ça va changer dans votre job de pilote de savoir que...
But what will it change in your job as a pilot?
The airplane properly. If we have any kind of incident, we just make sure that the fire marshals are aware that they're on board. Otherwise, it has nothing, makes no difference to our job.
Monsieur McKenna, peut-être, après ça, on pourra demander à Monsieur...
Mr. McKenna, perhaps? A carrier must verify if the batteries are far removed from sensitive equipment, for example.
Have a fire aboard the aircraft, you're going to want to land the aircraft as quickly as possible. Now, having said that, when you actually make a decision on where to land, different factors can influence that. Something that we practice all the time in the simulator is landing as quickly as possible, but you will have a choice of an airport that is very close but perhaps has a very short runway or poor weather or a bad instrument approach procedure, choosing that airport over an airport that's farther away but has better facilities. And that's the job that we do as pilots.
Okay.
Now, if I have an aircraft and I know I have a fire on board and I know that this fire cannot be put out by any of the extinguishing measures I have on the aircraft, and if I knew I had, say, 90,000 lithium batteries on board, I may make a decision to land at a closer airport that doesn't have as good of facilities, or possibly even to ditch the aircraft in the water. The Asiana accident that happened,
Okay.
they attempted to do that.
Présentement, qu'est-ce qui nous empêche?
At present, what prevents us, and you've got a recommendation 5, with regard to packaging, saying that these batteries are dangerous goods. Why is this not being done now? What's the argument against that?
Became part of the dangerous goods system through other chemistries of batteries that prior to the 1990s were not nearly as dangerous in transportation. And when lithium batteries came on the scene, they were added to these provisions. And the difficulty becomes if you regulate the batteries, then anytime somebody ships a spare battery for a cell phone or a spare battery for a computer, they become a dangerous goods shipper. And that presents a lot of difficulties in transportation. Having said that, the way the dangerous goods regulations are structured, it looks at the individual battery and says a consumer-sized battery is therefore accepted from the regulations to allow that person to ship a battery. But once that battery is accepted, there is nothing in the regulations that prevents consolidations of those shipments. So we have thousands and thousands of batteries that individually do not represent a great risk to the aircraft, but when taken together, they do. And unless we regulate those batteries, there's no way for the
Votre
operator to know.
recommandation, c'est vraiment de...
But your recommendation, you say no dangerous goods labels are required for some lithium batteries. In fact, what are you recommending that we do with this? Do you want us to require that as soon as there's a lithium battery, everyone on the plane should be informed of it? The pilot should make an announcement? What do you want exactly?
Inform pilots of dangerous goods shipments is through an established process for all kinds of dangerous goods, and we have a pilot notification form. The point I'm making here is if you have a 5-gallon drum of paint or 5-gallon thing of paint or even dry ice, the pilot is notified of that dangerous goods, but if that's next to a pallet of thousands of lithium batteries, the pilot would be unaware that those batteries were on board. So yes, we do want batteries, because they represent a risk to the aircraft, to be included in this established dangerous goods system and have the appropriate labels and notification.
OK. Bon, ben, j'avais une autre question sur un autre sujet.
Had another question on another issue. Mr. McKenna, you mentioned, I'd written this down, you mentioned that based on the carrier categories, there could be changes in the way of doing the SMSs, and you say that for the 704s it's a little trickier. Could you give us concrete examples so that we can better understand? How could we get a better SMS system? I didn't understand what you said. You're talking about a terminal? I understand that you want to establish a distinction between the 703s and the 704s. What you said, in fact, is that in the 705 category, it might be easier to have SMS systems than for the 703s and 704s. What I said is that you mustn't transfer a system to the 705s and expect that the system will be applied in the same way with the 705s and the 704s. That's what I stated. The challenge is to develop a system that is appropriate based on the size of the companies.
Now move to Mr. Braid, 5 minutes.
Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Thank you, gentlemen, for being here this morning. Captain Blandford, I wanted to start with you. Thank you for a very helpful presentation. I just wanted to zero in on your two main concerns and recommendations. First of all, with respect to protecting the confidentiality of ASR's air safety reports filed by pilots. I'm just trying to understand what the role of government would be here, and specifically what you're looking for in terms of changes or improvements to better protect the confidentiality of information in these reports.
Well, I would argue that, first of all, nobody's trying to hide anything. That's not what it's about. It's about protecting the confidentiality and making sure there's free and open reporting. So if for some reason a department of government, whether it's the occupational health and safety folks, feel that they need to see an air safety report that was written by a pilot for an incident, that the appropriate person have the appropriate expertise to be allowed to see that for a specific purpose. For example, if a flight attendant was injured in flight, or if on the ground somebody was injured because I forgot to set the parking brake, and then I wrote the safety report being completely honest about why I think I failed to set the parking brake, and then the occupational health and safety folks or a lawyer wants to see my report because he wants to sue me because a guy was injured, that's not the reason we have safety reports. So we need protections, and we need the appropriate people with knowledge and understanding of what the reports are about, to only be permitted to see those things and in appropriate circumstances. Otherwise, we'll stop reporting.
Okay. Are you familiar with some of the aspects of the government's proposed legislation 5-6 years ago, C7, that Mr. Watson was describing, that was hoisted by the opposition, that was subverted by the opposition at the time? There were elements, as I recall, of non-punitive reporting in that legislation. Are you familiar with those, and is that what you're looking for?
I am familiar with that. We were we wanted that bill to pass specifically for that reason, to protect the data. We need legislation to protect it, because if the data is not protected and it gets in the hands of government, access to information, we know how that would be. So we definitely need that data protected. Right now, the gatekeepers of this information are the airline operators, and they keep the data. That way it's not available for access to information. But if the government wants it, the only way we'll hand it over is if there's proper procedures in place to ensure that it will stay confidential and used appropriately.
So one recommendation that this committee could perhaps make at the conclusion of our study in this important area is to suggest that those provisions be brought back and reintroduced. Would you support that?
ALPA supports that.
Yeah,
I'm seeing nodding heads across the table. Any further comments?
No, and again, it's essential, and I want to emphasize the flight data analysis and flight data monitoring. That information is hugely valuable for safety and for commercial reasons, but there are no protections whatsoever for that data. In fact, in other jurisdictions in other parts of the world, if you land too far down the runway and they look at the flight data analysis stuff, you're fined $3,500 because they're using that data against you, and it's not for flight safety. And we want to emphasize that this stuff has to be protected for safety purpose.
Okay. Now, that was where I wanted to go next, flight data monitoring data. How's that different than the confidentiality of reports that we just touched on?
The flight data monitoring system in Canada, FDM, in the U.S. it's called FOQA, Flight Operations Quality Assurance. And what it is software on the aircraft that measure somewhere between 2,000 parameters a second. People say they want recorders in the cockpit. You already have that. You've got that FDA data there. It can tell you everything. Why it's not mandated, I don't know.
How is the information from flight data recording being used now, and what specific changes are you looking for?
It's a joint agreement between the carrier and the association, and we supply 2 gatekeepers, pilots. This data is reviewed by them daily. If they see something they don't like, Ed flew into Hong Kong and he was really, really quick on the approach. He was not following SOP. This guy will call me and say, hey, Ed, what happened last night? Now, I can tell him, get lost, but that's not the road I want to go down. The road I want to go down is, you know what, the controller had me really, really quick. There was a monsoon coming in. We had to get down on the ground. He's going to look at it and say, oh, geez, you still, should have followed the rules here. He might recommend a course of action, or he might say, good call, have a nice day. That's how it works.
But if I could add really...
I'm sorry?
What's wrong? Nothing.
It's a great system. It works great. But the problem is, not everyone has it. It's not mandated. Transport did a risk assessment, I believe, last year and said we don't need it.
And there's nothing to protect the employer from using it for other purposes, unless we have a good agreement, like Ed just explained, that we have with our employer. Otherwise, it can be used for any purpose.
That's your television in the cockpit. You can read whatever you want off that.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that.
Okay. Mr. Adams, did you want to comment on that as well?
Just that it works for the Air Canada Pilot Association because they have an agreement with their operator. They have the agreement, but it's not in regulation. It's just another example of flight data monitoring. I've heard that you'll land somewhere and maintenance will show up and say, I'm here to change that fuel pump. And pilots say, what fuel pump? Well, we saw that a couple hours ago that it was starting to go. So they know in advance. So it's a good tool.
Okay. Just before we go to Mr. Sullivan, Mr. Blanford, you've commented 2 or 3 times, and just for clarification to help myself understand if nobody else, you talk about protection of your reporting from your employer, it appears. Well, I just let me finish and you can explain. It seems to me that when a mistake is reported or whatever, and reporting, I think, is the right thing to do, you're talking about protection from being reprimanded, unless I'm misunderstanding you. Like, if somebody makes a mistake, I mean, I'm not going to get into what the penalty or punishment should be, but shouldn't there be some kind of a process in place where it is dealt with in some manner?
Absolutely. There's no way we should be hiding behind flight safety if it's something deliberate, intentional, or criminally negligent action has taken place. Never, never, never. In the Air Force, what used to happen is we'd have a flight safety stream, and the flight safety person doing the inspection would call the squadron commander and say, you need to start a parallel investigation. That's all I can say, because we've identified something criminally negligent or damaging. Well, there's no way that can occur. What we're talking about on a day-to-day basis is that the normal flight safety report that, again, to use an example of injury, that may cause injury, can't be summoned by lawyers, brought out in court to use for other purposes than safety. Otherwise, we're not going to get honest and fulsome reporting. What you said, sir, absolutely. We don't condone that at all. And we could probably give you examples of flight data management where the gatekeepers have looked and put up a red flag, and that's caused some ramifications that are not related to safety.
Okay.
I think we're getting a little confused with the confidentiality issue and everything. The reports are confidential. No one sees them other than the appropriate people. What our concern was several years ago, They were getting court orders. That actual copy of that report I wrote. So as a line pilot, I'm looking and saying, I'm not going to give you a full, robust report because it could end up on the front page of a national newspaper. So now what the guys are writing is, took off, had hydraulic failure, landed. You don't get the meat that happened in there.
Okay, just to carry this, to me, and don't take this the wrong way, but it seems pretty irresponsible to me for somebody to say, well, if I don't get what I want on the reporting end of it, I just won't report. That bothers me as a passenger or somebody that flies quite regular. So I don't like that. But to carry this out, it seems to me that the agreement about the protection of this information, that's something that your union, I guess, or your organization needs to take up with your employer. Like I don't see that Transport Canada needs to, get into that.
Our employer vehemently fought releasing those reports because they knew what the damage would be. That report is meant, in a perfect SMS system, that report is meant, if another, let's say the OSH group comes along and says, we're concerned about, I don't know, a hard landing somewhere, we want to look at it. The OSH component, the pilot component of that group should look at that report and say, yes, these are the details you need, but that actual piece of paper I wrote should never, ever be released.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, if I could, one of the first things that happens when an SMS report is filed, the receiver looks at it, and if they believe it's outside of the parameters of the program, such as maybe it's willful conduct, they will then immediately say, you're going to have to file this a different way. This doesn't fit the program. That's one of the first things that happens.
And who tells you that? Is it Transport or
no? That is the operator, whoever's the gatekeeper of the SMS. And
okay.
You talk about pilot unions, talking to the operators. There's a lot of pilots in this country that are not unionized, do not have a formal process to go to their employer.
Okay, good point. And just one last thing. You mentioned, Mr. Blanford, I believe, about a $3,500 fine, say, for landing too far down the runway. Is that from Transport Canada or your employer?
No, I was using it as an example of how another jurisdiction in the world have no protections in flight data management and flight data analysis. So they look at the computer at the end of the day and they go, oh, you landed too far down the runway, therefore we're going to fine you. So there's no protections. They're not using the flight.
But does that actually happen?
No, not here.
Oh,
not here,
okay.
sir. No.
Okay.
But I'm saying that we want protections. I mean, what about somebody wants to do that?
Okay, I got you. Just wanted to clear. Mr. Sullivan, 5 minutes.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair, and I appreciate the more robust discussion of what's really driving this. We've heard testimony from the railroad industry who are having similar difficulties with the Transportation Safety Board has recommended for the past 8-9 years that there be voice and video recorders on board, and the railroads have said, we'll put them in tomorrow as long as you let us use them for disciplinary purposes. And you don't do that in the airline industry, clearly, and you never have, and yet they're there, and they're useful, and they're made use of for incident circumstances. So we're still fighting that old battle. But your battle, C6 and C7 would have corrected, as I understand it. That was 8 years ago that was first introduced. And so what's the holdup? Does anybody talk to you folks about that? No? No, it's just sitting there somewhere in a thought of this government. In terms of the SMS itself, the other thing that we have heard in the conduct of our discussions with the railroad industry in particular is that SMSs are confidential, proprietary, competitive reasons information. And is there any reason that an SMS system should not be disclosed publicly so that we can know exactly what's in it and maybe help work on it?
It's not only, if I may comment, it's not only so much the system. The system is how a company works day to day, and that is the operations of the company. The information, sometimes a company will even self-report on incidents, or there will be reports following from PBIs or whatever, and that information, when disclosed to the government, is no longer protected. And we have many members that have been fighting, for example, third parties asking access to commercially sensitive information that is included in those reports from being divulged by the company. Now, for example, if I have a company and I report something to you, and I could get within 6 months or within a period of time a request for access from somebody, have access to the information, and I'm not even allowed to know who the request has been filed by. So a lot of this information needs to be protected, and it isn't in the current legislation.
Right. In terms of Air Canada in particular, you have a good, strong trade union relationship between yourselves and Air Canada, and so you have managed to protect the integrity of the SMS system from prying eyes on the outside world, some of it anyway, and from disciplinary use. And I guess the problem that some members of this committee are having is human nature. If you're going to get punished for something, you're not going to talk about it. And safety can't be like that. That's essentially right.
You hit the nail on the head, sir. Yeah. That's exactly it. We're not trying to prevent anything from being publicly accessed. We want to enhance safety. And what is the best way to enhance safety? It's a safety culture. It's open reporting and a good system that identifies the safety issues and a mechanism for fixing them. And then when we can't agree as, say, stakeholders and an operator, the regulator should help us provide a mechanism for fixing those problems. That's the closed loop, and as simply as I can state it.
Now, the other testimony we had last week, and I don't know if you guys heard this, but Transport Canada is actually planning for more air accidents over the next few years. Their accident rate target per 100,000 flight hours goes from 6.3 in 2010-11 to 6.7 in 2014-15, which is essentially 40 to 50 more accidents in the air or on the ground in Canada in the next over the next 3 or 4 years. That seems to me it smacks of a failure of some system or other, whether it's SMS or whether it's Transport Canada. Do you folks have any comment on that?
I was shocked when I read that number, and I mean, I'm speaking quite frankly, like I should here, I think. I mean,
absolutely,
very shocked and just unbelievable. Can't believe it. Not sure of the source. I mean, I would love to be able to dig deeper because we don't, we see everything getting better and safer, and the world that we fly in, airplanes are safer, they're built stronger, the monitoring systems are better, pilots are well trained, we have good systems, and to see that was, quite surprising for me. I'm not sure what Dan would say.
Yeah, I'm not too sure where the numbers came from either, but if they are valid, then we should be promoting SMS even more so that we can find those areas that need to be fixed and we can be proactive.
Okay, sorry, Mr. Sullivan. Okay, yeah, I'll allow that.
From Transport Canada, their own reports on plans and priorities 2014-15, and there's a website where it came from. So it's Transport Canada itself. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Young, 5 minutes.
Thank you very much for being here, gentlemen. I have some other questions, but just on that point, I think I do recall them saying that, would you say that there are substantively more flights in Canada than they were years ago?
Yes.
And so there is an error of margin and therefore an error of accidents and incidents and safety. So would you say that that could be part of where that may come from?
I'm not a statistician, but sure.
I could say there are more flights, but safety record is also improving. And it'd be useful to know in which segments of air industry they get these numbers out, rather than just throwing out a number at large.
Yes, absolutely. And we heard from the chair that we will track that down because I'm very, very sure that this committee is interested in that. Now, I fly every week because I'm from Vancouver, so of course air safety is of primary concern to me. I was particularly interested in these agreements that you just spoke about. Particularly around, we understand you've been very clear that, you don't want to release these to the public because then that sort of detracts from your ability to have the safety culture, all right? So, but having said that, what elements are in these agreements that could or should be part of perhaps some government regulation so that we can track these elements and perhaps even put them into regulation so to ensure better SMS. Do you have any thoughts or ideas around that?
Well, certainly an act of Parliament to ensure that these reports remain confidential, because that will help ensure that you get reports, because people are not going to self-report. Even if there was a 1% chance they know this could be used against them somehow.
No, we've heard that. You know, we understand that. We understand about the safety culture and the need to report, you know, in an open manner that is not going to, non-punitive, as you said, right? The question that I'm asking is, obviously you have all said that this agreement that you have with between Air Canada and the air pilots and et cetera is extremely important. You get an amazing amount of data from this. On the other hand, we are feeling very uncomfortable about the fact that it's not obviously public. The public has, you know, in this three-legged stool, do not have access to this very important information, as you've said. So the question then is, what parts of it or what elements of it can be made public or should be made public, and or that we can then add to SMS to ensure that SMS is increasingly more safe?
I think 30 years ago, we didn't have a system like this, and someone came along and said, let's have a system where the pilots, the line people can come along and openly report, and it's not going to be held against them. And now I'm hearing people are suggesting, well, we want to change it. We want everyone to know what's going on. You're defeating the purpose of the confidentiality there and not having it known. The carrier gets these reports. They're called air safety reports. When they come in and they do their PVI, or performance validation inspection, they look at how the carrier handles those reports. I get the air safety reports sent to me every day, so I'm part of that third-legged stool. So if I'm not happy with how the carrier is handling those reports, I go to them with a stack and say, what are we doing with these? And there's other mechanisms we can use to carry them on further. Now Transport, when they do their audit on Air Canada or whoever they're doing it on, is they've got these reports and they say, well, what do you do with them? Well, we took this report, we mitigated the risk, they HVACs classify them, so they put a level of, I won't say a level of blame, but they say, well, maybe it's not the pilot flying the airplane, maybe it's further up the ladder there. So the system is taking care of itself. What are you going to glean from me writing a report saying I took off, I had a hydraulic failure, I landed? Why do you want that?
Well, because wouldn't you say that that's part of SMS? I mean, isn't that why we're here?
What are you going to do with that, though?
We're here to ascertain whether the system can be safer. You're saying to me that there are these private agreements between the corporation and the air pilots, and then you self-monitor, you self-regulate, and you fix those things. We're saying that isn't there a government role to then monitor or oversee that? And so it's kind of an odd thing where this has been going on. It should be part of SMS. It is part of SMS, perhaps, but you're saying that that should not be part of it?
If I may just give you an example of where SMS works, I'll just be quick. A pilot's flying along and he's given a clearance to climb from flight level 340 up to flight level 350. And he reads back 360. And he climbs up to flight level 360. Next thing you know, he realizes he's at the wrong altitude and what do I do? In the old days, you would never say anything because you would be fined by Transport Canada. You would be punished for that. So he writes up an SMS report. I thought I read back 350. The controller didn't say anything, so I assumed it was right. The company gets this report. Now, over the span of a month, they're getting 4 and 5 reports of the same thing. So they're saying, there's something wrong here. It turns out in this particular instance, I think it was in northern Manitoba, the repeater for the VHF communication was in a poor spot. It wasn't very clear. They're always having trouble hearing each other. They put in a new tower. The communication is a lot clearer. We don't have those problems anymore. So after the fact, I suppose we could de-identify all this information and say, you know, there was a bad transmitter somewhere and it's fixed, so the system works. But I don't think it does any good, let's say it was me, for the media to find out, hey, Dan climbed to the wrong altitude. What does that do?
It's good for the public to know that that was fixed.
As long as it's de-identified, it's not specific to an airline, we could certainly
That's my question around, are there elements around this that could be that you could tease out that we can then therefore use to increase the safety.
Yeah, you're out of time, Ms. Young.
Sorry, thank you.
If you want to respond very quickly, you can.
If I, like Dan's scenario, if I set my altitude and I climbed flight level 360, you're going to know about it. You're going to know it in the daily CADORS report. The system takes care of that. That's where you're going to hear about it. The air safety reports are just another added layer of safety. So you have the layers, and the safety reports are just another layer.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Tope. 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to our witnesses. Very insightful. I just want to quickly touch on this because it's been talked about a lot, and I don't want to go too far into this. But the ASR reporting, and I understand 100% where you're coming from with the need for that not to be used as a disciplinary action. So I get that and I understand that. How do we separate that out in a practical way, though, from a situation where you do have a pilot, seeing as we have pilots at the table here, that is showing a pattern of a certain behavior? That is a danger. That is not safe management of his aircraft. If they're not allowed to use that data, how is the airline able to deal with that individual? Do you have a solution to that? Do you have an answer for that particular dilemma? If they're not allowed to look at that and say, you know, there's a real danger and there's a situation of safety here, how do we deal with that?
That's in place right now. When the report gets filed, if the receiver of this looks at it and said, no, that's not within the boundaries here, it will be taken care of in a different avenue.
There's always two pilots. They're in the simulator every 8 months. There's all kinds of monitoring and feedback systems other than a safety system when it comes to an individual pilot. But what we're most concerned about are trends amongst all of the pilots.
Yeah, no, I get that. I understand that's what you're talking about. I understand the trends amongst the pilots. Okay. So I'm just saying if this would show a trend amongst a individual pilot, there needs to be a way, obviously. I understand where you're coming from, and you don't want it to be used in a court of law. You want to have a robust report, so you don't want them to thin it down so it's next to nothing. But you know, there needs to be a parallel system and a fairly robust parallel system, and that has to be what I'd love to hear from you, and maybe you could even table it rather than take the time here, is how that robust reporting on the individual basis would work, because there has to be both those mechanisms in place.
Yeah, and
I just don't want somebody to be able to hide behind the ASR. That's my concern, right? That somebody can say, well, there's no way you can deal with me because the ASR protects me.
Yeah, we don't want that either. We're absolutely vehemently against that. And like I said, there's checks and balances. And, you know, pilots are very proud individuals. And we have programs set up where if a pilot that's flying with you and says, this guy's not doing too well here, there's a system in place where we can talk about that. We want to weed those individuals out. That's not good for anybody.
And we have gatekeepers, honest brokers who look and go, uh-oh, I need to tell somebody without specifics that they need to look into something. Like I gave the Air Force example, right? There's a duty, an obligation as well, and part of our ethical makeup to do that.
Just one more point. You can't hide behind an air safety report. I can have a hard landing in Hong Kong and submit an air safety report. I had a hard landing. But the fleet side, the operational side of the airline also gets that. And they're going to look at that, and they're going to call you in, and they're going to look at it, and they're going to look at your file and what you've been doing. So you can hide behind these reports. But just if I take one more second, Ms. Young, I've been thinking about your question about the ASRs and everything. The Americans have a great system. It's called their ASAP system. The carriers submit, I'll submit my ASR. The carrier will process that ASR. Then they'll de-identify it, and they put it in a national database. So, yeah, I'm glad you asked that question. Sorry.
Just, I want to just go on to something very different quickly. Captain Blanford, you had talked about on your non-compliance examples, ICAO requires state authority to set acceptable levels of safety, and TC allows air operators to determine their own acceptable levels of safety. Are you really saying that an air operator can decide for themselves what level of safety is acceptable, and there's really no oversight? There's nobody looking at saying, hold on a minute, that's not acceptable. Transport Canada just kind of said, well, whatever you guys think is acceptable is fine with us.
I wouldn't go so far, and I know, sir, that you don't mean to be that casual about it, but no, I don't think anybody does that. But what I'm saying is that ICAO says that the state is supposed to set specific standards, guidelines, and safety standards to meet. And all I'm saying is that here it's left to the operator to do that.
But
And
is
it works with us.
viewed by Transport Canada? Do they not look at the levels that you say are acceptable and say, yes, that would fall within the parameters of what we say are acceptable?
Yeah, I would argue yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Well, I just think it's very important to have that
Yes.
on the record, that it's not like it's just left to any operator. I can decide, well, my safety levels are here, that's fine with me, and the other guy's up here, but, you know, this is what works for me.
I do not want to imply in any way, shape, or form that we don't have a good relationship with Transport Canada and they're not doing what I think is their job on a day-to-day basis. I'm trying to point out, however, that there are some improvements that we can make to the SMS system and that the oversight, the regulator, can do some additional things in accordance with the ICAO standards to help us improve. But we have a good relationship and it works.
Just one last question, actually, if I can get to it, and we can come back to it, Captain Adamus, if there's a chance. But I just from each one of you, just a quick yes or no answer is in your opinion, you know, what's happened in during the introduction of you talked about safety management systems in all your introductions. Has the Canada's aviation safety regime been improved through the introduction of SMS systems?
Yes.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Good. Thank you. And I see nodding heads from Mr. McKenna also, so thank you.
Could I go back to your original?
Absolutely.
Transport Canada sets the regulations, and everybody must adhere to it, to that level. Safety, absolutely have to. But you can't regulate for every single scenario. And it's those scenarios that are sort of in the middle that SMS will help catch if there's an issue that's not quite going the way you want. Because you don't want to get in and say, well, hey, on paper we're compliant, but if you've identified some risks, and that's what SMS does, then you can fix them going forward.
Okay, you're out of time. We're getting down to the end of our meeting. We have time for some 4-minute rounds. So, Mr. Mai.
Questions to ALPA. So you represent 51,000 professional pilots. You represent 32 airlines, but you also represent the First Air airline. So can you talk to us about the Flight 6560 crash? What I'd like to know is really what happens on the ground in terms of reporting, because we know that the TSB actually came out with a report. They looked at the fact that there were issues with SMS. Basically, it failed because lack of reporting. Can you maybe talk to us about it?
I'm not familiar with the actual details of that. I do know that they did identify some areas. Some of it was equipment, the lack of equipment on the aircraft as well, and there's been some recommendations. And you know, it's unfortunate that it's taken an accident to get some recommendations for change, because in our view, safety management system, we try to identify those hazards before an accident so we can make change so that wouldn't happen again. Unfortunately, I'm not familiar in detail with the report.
Okay. Also, there's been some issues with respect to maintenance. For instance, Avio in Montreal, we know that everything has been transferred elsewhere, and also we know about some of the wet listing issues. Can you talk to us about how that what's the impact with SMS? You know, basically my question is, we have either maintenance being done elsewhere and reporting. Are they compliant with the SMS system here? How does it work? Maybe Mr. Adamus and after Mr. Bernard.
Our association, our MEC, asked me to produce a report about a year and a half ago when Avios was being transferred and everything. We looked at the MROs that were conducting the maintenance for our carrier, and they were all world-class operations. Lufthansa Technique, they do the work. The one that does the work in the U.S. does it for the DND, UPS, FedEx. They're not second-string operators. So on that aspect, no, the MROs are top-notch.
As far as I know, from our nine operators, they do most of the work in-house or in Canada.
Okay. Another question to ALPA again. In terms of, because we mentioned or we heard the fact that there were some issues with respect to inspection, but without notice. Can you tell us whether or not your your members have been inspected without notice within the past few years?
So if you're talking pilots specifically, normally if we're in a simulator, get 24 hours notice just to say, by the way, somebody's coming with you. If it's a line check, they show up at the gate. So it's completely unannounced.
Okay. Final questions. With respect to, it was raised that there's a fatigue issue, and we also saw that the same problem with in rails. And one of the problems that we have right now is that nothing has been done. Can you tell us more about, and for us, it really is a safety issue. I mean, fatigue.
Yes, we've gone through the Transport Canada process of taking all the stakeholders, putting them in a room for several years, talking about what needs to be adjusted, looking at the science of fatigue. Very, very important, the science of fatigue. All the stakeholders got together, wrote a report, made a recommendation on recommending changes to the flight and duty times in this country because our duty times are very much out of date. So that report now was filed in November of 2012. And it's going through the Transport Canada process of being evaluated, trying to create regulations. And it's been 18 months, and of course, we expect probably another year or two if you create some regulations and go through justice. It's going to take a long time. We all know that the Colgan Air crash in the United States caused that process to accelerate greatly. We don't want that in this country, and I don't want to be dramatic. I'm not using safety that way, but flight and duty times need to be found. It is our biggest issue right now.
Okay, thank you. Mr. McGinney, 4 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Gentlemen, are you aware that in the public accounts from 2011-12 to 2012-13 that there's been an 11% cut in aviation safety spending by Transport Canada?
I'm not aware of those.
You're not tracking those numbers on behalf of your members?
I do know there's been a cut to the budget. Yes, I do know that.
Mr. McKenna, are your companies aware of that?
Yes, we are following that. Transport Canada assures us that these cuts were not safety related.
Although it's under the heading of aviation safety, they're not safety related. Is that right?
Well,
thanks for that. I appreciate it. I don't want to put you on the spot.
Answer.
I'm sure that's their answer. Mr. Adamus and Mr. Blanford are captains. Forgive me, captains both. Are you aware? Do you know the Canadian Federal Pilots Association?
We're aware.
Yes. Is it a credible organization?
They represent the Transport Canada inspectors.
Are they credible?
I don't know a whole lot about them. I'm sure they are.
I don't know anything about their structure, their governance. I don't know what their mandates are. I know there's a union that represents the pilots.
Right. So we're told through testimony by Mr. Daniel Slunder, who is the head of that association, that they represent 382 licensed pilots who work as inspectors at Transport Canada and at the Transportation Safety Board. They also represent 32 licensed pilots who work at NAV Canada. Those would be pretty qualified people, right?
They certainly know Transport Canada, yes.
Absolutely. Some of those are peers, people I went to school with, I flew with in the Air Force, absolutely.
Okay, so I want to review some of the testimony he's given us here, and I want your reaction. Have you read his testimony? Great. So what do you say to Canadians when he testifies that we have 50 fewer inspectors today than when Mr. Slunder last appeared before this committee in November 2009?
If that's a fact he keeps track of, Are you
concerned by that?
No, I'm not.
You're not? Okay.
That's all you want me to say, sir?
Yeah, that's all I want you to say. You're not concerned by the fact we have 50 fewer inspectors than we did in 2009? Okay. He cites the Auditor General's review of Transport Canada's aviation safety program. He says the number of inspectors and engineers needed to ensure safety is unknown. Significantly fewer inspections are done than planned. Minimum acceptable level of surveillance to ensure safety is not established. No documented rationale for changing acceptable minimum levels of surveillance. How do you respond to that?
I'd respond that safety is improved since we've implemented SMS and we've gone away from the traditional cultural model that we used to have of inspections, enforcement, and punishment. Okay. We have improved greatly in our safety since we've gone away from that model.
So the Auditor General is wrong, because that's CAG's testimony.
I don't think that inspections alone are going to improve safety. Right. I've said to you, sir, that we have as much experience And we do way more inspections of our own carrier than Transport Canada ever will. We do them on a daily basis.
So when Mr. Slunder testifies that when he says, quote, Transport Canada's rosy forecast is based on a simple sleight of hand. Inspections once required annually can now be as infrequent as once every 5 years. Is that true?
So I haven't talked to, Mr. Slunder about his testimony.
So you don't just, because I've got 4 minutes, so yes, no, roughly?
But the question is, for me, if there's less inspections done, is that because we have a more robust SMS system in place? This has been in 5 years. I would say yes.
Okay. He says the Transport Canada is cancelling all comprehensive SMS assessments for airports and aerodromes in favor of doing only more narrowly focused process validation inspections. Is that true?
I'm not familiar with the
So you haven't read his testimony?
I don't know if it's true or not, sir. I'm not aware if it's true. I have read it. I don't know if it's true or not.
I would commend it to your members.
Okay. Thank you. Mr. Watson, 4 minutes.
Thank you.
I just want to remind the members that we have a motion that was put on notice with due time by Mr. Watson, so the last 10 minutes we'll deal with, so you have the last 4 minutes.
Thank you. Chair, thank you again to our witnesses here. We've heard, in contrast to the UCTE's testimony, that inspections, in fact, by Transport Canada are occurring. They're not just paper exercises in the office. And we're hearing that in Transport Canada, inspectors show up unannounced at the gate. Those are important points to understand today. I'm holding in my hand the Transportation Safety Board of Canada's report for aviation occurrences and accidents, their report on statistics for 2013. In that report, it points out, it cites in 2011, civilian flights in Canada, not including ultralights, gliders, balloons, etc., represented near an estimated 3,966,000 hours of flying activity. There has been a significant downward trend in accident rates in the last decade, from 7.0 in 2002 to 5.7 in 2011. In fact, the safety statistics are the best in a decade in Canada and improving. Mr. Chalmers, who was in front of this committee last meeting, suggested, well, design improvements in planes are largely to explain the improvement in safety. Is that a fair assessment? Or isn't it interesting that the introduction and the maturity of safety management systems coincides very neatly, in fact, with the improvement in safety statistics?
Yeah, I would argue that you're right. You're right, sir. We're using the tools. We're way more sophisticated in identifying issues and fixing them today. Flight data management system for us is incredible. We can identify things that are going to happen if we don't fix it without even reporting. We're using the technology of today, the sophistication in education and training systems to identify problems and fix them, and SMS has helped us to do that. Are there room for improvements? Absolutely.
Sure, and that's what this committee is charged with. I appreciate your positive outlook on that. If we were to listen to the UCTE, they've grieved this shift toward safety management systems some 1,000 times, as they confessed at this committee in the last meeting, and that's sad. Mr. McKenna, I want to ask you a question. You did develop the ATAC SMS toolkit and guide for the non-major carriers here. We talked about other classes in order to help them implement safety management systems or some version that would be adaptable or acceptable to their particular classes. Have you had any response from Transport Canada about your particular toolkit? Is this something they're looking at? Is this something they've considered perhaps adopting as a standard? What feedback are you getting from the regulator?
Well, we've shared it with them from the beginning, from the design part of it all the way through, and we've shared it. I mean, it's not necessarily known by all inspectors out in the field. Transport Canada would never go as far as sanctioning it or giving it its golden seal of approval, but they are encouraging us to distribute it and promote it with our members.
Okay, thank you. That's all I have.
Thank you. I want to thank our witnesses. We have a bit of committee business that we have to do in camera, So thanks again for being here, and I ask that if there's any media here that you want to ask the witnesses questions, please go outside. I have to clear the room because we have to go in camera. You have a point of order, Mr. McGinney?
Before we go into camera, Mr. Chair, I want to raise with you a procedural matter, which I think is very important. It relates to the minutes of the meeting of Tuesday, May 13th.
May 13th.
Correct.
Okay.
That clearly state that the committee adopted the subcommittee report indicating that Transport Canada officials and officials from the Auditor General's office would be invited to appear on Thursday, June 12th. Do you recollect that, Mr. Chair?
I know they were invited. Yeah, I can't remember the dates, Mr. McGinney.
Those were the minutes of the meeting of Tuesday, May 13th.
Okay.
The first point I want to raise as a point of order, Mr. Chair, is I understand that you, and not the trusted nonpartisan official tasked with arranging these things for this committee and all committees, you wrote to the Office of the Auditor General to invite him.
Yes, and you asked for that, and I gave it to you.
In your letter to him, you say it serves as an unofficial invitation to appear before the House of Commons Standing Committee on Transportation, Infrastructure and Communities.
Yes.
Can you help me understand, just in terms of orders, Mr. Chair, why would you invite the Auditor General and not the clerk?
The clerk would have been the official. I was putting them on notice. It was something that I dealt with. You got a problem with that? Well, I guess you've made it.
It's abnormal practice, Mr. Chair. I haven't seen that happen before in almost 10 years here.
Well, I don't know about you, Mr. McGinney, but any time that I have a witness that I want to put on a list at all, I contact them and in advance to make sure that they're even willing to come. So in this case here, you know, so I wanted to see them here as much as you are.
Okay, so the second point I want to raise then, when the Auditor General actually agrees to come,
correct,
in his note to you, he says, quote, I am happy to make myself available to the committee on June 12th to further discuss findings in our 2013 chapter. Mm-hmm. My understanding is you, as chair, unilaterally decided
but
against,
if you,
let me finish my sentence.
You're only reading part of it. If you go in there, he has nothing to report, and I made the decision that if there's nothing to report, we'll have him at a later date when he does have something to report.
With all due respect, Mr. Chair, is that your unilateral discretion?
As chair, I have to make decisions,
or
are you
not bound under the rules to actually proceed on the basis of the agreement as I described in the minutes of the proceedings on Tuesday, May 13th, 2014?
Look, Mr. McGinney, if you have a problem with that decision, that's fine. You've made that. But when I attend a meeting, I like it to be productive. And if the gentleman has nothing to add at this time, that wouldn't be a very productive meeting. So I made the decision. Obviously, you don't agree with that, and accept that. So do you have any other points of order?
What I would put to you, sir, that under the rules, this is abnormal practice, and that in fact, what should be occurring is once you hear back from the Auditor General, you should table his response to this subcommittee or committee in its entirety, and you can perhaps raise this point and have a discussion about it and let this committee decide, after it is already approved, that the invitation should be extended to the Auditor General.
Okay, point taken.
That it's not a discretionary matter for the chair to decide.
That's your opinion. So have you got any other point of order?
It's not an opinion. I'm asking you and the clerk to give me an idea, please, in terms of the rules of procedure in this committee, how this is working and how it's going to go work going forward. It's not an opinion. It's
as
a
far
point
as
of order.
the Auditor General, which is the witness in question here, will be invited again.
When will he be invited?
When would you like him to be invited?
It's not for me to decide. It's for this committee to decide, which is why we rendered a decision in the first place to invite him.
Based on the letter, and I don't have it in front of me, but I'm thinking that he'll probably at some point when he's got something to add to it, that he'll get back to me or get back to the clerk, and he can be invited. If you want to say right now we want to invite him back at the first meeting in the fall, then say so.
I'd like to have him back here on June 12th, pursuant to the decision this committee made.
Well, if you want me to cancel or have the clerk cancel the witnesses that we have for Thursday.
No, I think we can add him. Why don't we add him? He's available. He says he's available to make himself available to the committee on June 12th.
What's the wishes of the committee? Mr. Watson.
I'd like to speak to the point of order because the consent of the committee, at least from this side, was that the Auditor General would appear in relation to the work plan developed, or to respond to the work plan developed by Transport Canada. That was our consent in suggesting that the Auditor General appear, not just to appear in terms of a report he's already appeared in front of this committee on. That's a waste of our time. So if Mr. McGuinty wants to raise the consent to the committee, our consent was given contingent, and you can check the blues on that, but it was given contingent to him appearing to respond to Transport Canada's updated action and work plan in relation to his report, not in relation to his own findings in the 2013 report. So I would suggest that the chair has actually fulfilled the consent of the committee.
Sorry, Mr. Chair, whose contingency is Mr. Watson speaking about?
The government members here supported the Auditor General appearing before this committee in relation to responding to Transport Canada's action plan on his report, not about the general findings of the report. We've already done that exhaustively.
But, Mr. Chair, I didn't know that Mr. Watson had and the government members had the right to impose contingencies on committee decisions. When a committee makes a decision, which I can read out here, that in relation to the study of the review of the Canadian Transportation Safety Regime, officials from the Department of Transport, as well as officials from the Office of the Auditor General of Canada, be invited to appear on Thursday, June 12, 2014. I see no contingency in this writing at all.
Read the blues, Mr. Chair.
Okay.
So, Mr. Chair,
do you have another point of order?
I do. Can we invite, please, the Auditor General to fulfill the actual minutes of the proceedings and the agreement of this committee? Let's get the Auditor General of this committee on June 12th.
I'm going to call. Are you making that a motion?
I'm asking for you to explain why the Auditor General is not here.
Are you making that a motion that you want them to be added to Thursday's list? Okay.
Absolutely.
All in favor of the motion?
In clarification, because I don't have the minutes of the meeting, so can we just for the record know exactly what was because I understand that anyways.
Okay.
Just more information.
What I'm trying to get here, the clerk is right. We can't have a motion here on a point of order. Is everyone here in favor of asking the Auditor General to come Thursday? Those in favor? Opposed? Okay, it's defeated. Do you have another point of order?
No, I do.
Mr. Chair.
Sorry,
Mr.
I wasn't.
Watson.
I think
I've been recognized.
Well, you never said anything, so
okay.
Mr. Watson.
Thank you. I move that we proceed in camera. We move in camera.
Okay. So are we in?
What was the motion?
Motion to move in camera.
Is Mr. Watson providing any kind?
It's non-debatable.
I see. So we're shutting off the Canadian public right now. Is that it?
Mr. Chair, there's no discussion.
There is no discussion on it, and you know that. You've been around here as long as I have.
So we're shutting off the Canadian public. Got it.
No, we're going in camera.
Right, which means the public aren't following.
Call the vote.
You're out of order. We have a notice of motion that.
Are we going to? We have to suspend.
We have to vote on whether or not we go in camera.
All in favor? You know what the result's going to be. Those opposed? Okay. Mr. Watson, or are we in? Those in favor to go in camera? Okay. So you're in favor too?
So we have to suspend just to
okay. Are we? Let me know when we're suspended.
You have to suspend. We're down.
Are we now?
Yep. You have to suspend.
Okay.